communities were. Take lessons from them. And he says you will see the way in which they were a society that was so divided amongst themselves. They used to bury their daughters alive and so on and so forth. And so over a number of decades, a number of centuries, the community became a fragmented community where they had created their own cultures, they had created their own ways of living. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this so often in the Holy Quran. For example, in Surah Al-Yasin, he says, Rasulullah, لِتُنْذِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْذِرَ آبَاءُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. Rasulullah was sent to warn a community whose fathers were not warned, and as such they were heedless. The community was so far away from revelation, so far away from divine guidance, the way in which they lived. And so the Holy Quran speaks about the way in which that community was. As an example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by Rasulullah and his own existence. He says, لَعَمُّرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. I take an oath by your existence, Ya Rasulullah, by your own life, by your own presence. لَعَمْرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Most surely these people are wandering blindly in their intoxications. Now, think about this community that Rasulullah had to come to. What type of intoxications were they living in? This intoxication doesn't mean literally their alcohol. Yes, they were swimming in alcohol. Yes. But the reality was the way in which they were living was a despicable, immoral way of living at that time. Many verses speak about this. As an example, famously we know that the community at that time used to bury their daughters alive. There's a famous tradition, a very famous narration that says one day a woman from the Arabian community, that community at that time, she had become pregnant. She had had many children, and each time that child had been buried. And so this time, when she fell pregnant, she decided not to tell her husband, knowing that after she had given birth, her husband would come and kill that child again. The child was being in her womb, and her husband went away on business, went away on his travel, and she gave birth. She went to her next door neighbor and said, please take this child, take this baby girl, because if this child remains within our family, when my husband returns back from his trade, he will bury this child surely, and I cannot stand that happening. And so the next door neighbor took this child. Eventually the husband returned home, and after a few years this girl grew up to be a beautiful young child, and often enough the husband would go next door and play with this young child that was actually his daughter, not knowing that this child was actually his daughter. And so every day he goes attached and loves this child and plays with this child. Eventually, the mother of the child builds courage to be able to say to her husband that this is my child, this is our child that I had given birth to when you were away. So she sits down with him and tells him, this is your child from next door that you love so much, that you spend so much time doting upon. Father becomes enraged, takes this child, this young daughter, maybe 3 or 4 years old, takes this child, takes her out to the deserts and buries her alive. The narration specifically says that that daughter was buried alive, and she had her hand sticking out of that grave, trying to stop the sand from coming upon her, and her father was doing this to her. إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Most surely these people are wandering blindly in their intoxications. What else was this community like 1400 years ago? As an example, our verses of Quran and Ahadith tell us that this community used to perform tawaf of the Holy Kaaba naked, singing, clapping and dancing. Can you imagine a community more morally bereft, that when they come on their pilgrimage, they perform tawaf naked in front of each other? This is what this community was doing. Another verse twice mentioned in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the community as to how they used to gamble with each other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a verse saying, "La ta'kulu amwalakum bainakum bil batil." Do not eat up wealth from amongst yourselves in falsities. Our sixth Imam, Jaffer Ali Ladak, says about this particular verse that the people of Arabia prior to Islam, when they used to gamble with each other, when they had a debt and they used to lose their gambling, they wouldn't pay back with money. They would actually pay back the debt with their own family members. They would actually sell off their grandparents. They would actually sell off their family members, their uncles, their aunties, their cousins. And in order to sell off their debt, instead of selling off their camels, instead of selling off their business, they would rather keep their business and they would sell off their own grandparents to satisfy the debt from their gambling losses. This is the community that Rasulullah came to. How does an individual, not through magic, but through his personality, through spending time with people, by engaging with them directly, how does one man shape and change an entire community that thousands of people from all different types of demographics, different religions, different ideologies, different strengths, different weaknesses, different languages come together for the sake of one person and become righteous human beings from the hands of one individual? Quran says, by your life, إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Surely they were wandering blindly in their intoxication. After a few years with Rasulullah, only a few years with this man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals another verse saying, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرًا أُمَّةً أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You are the best of people amongst the whole of humanity. A narration tells us about a battle, about a particular event, a battle that Rasulullah was taking place in. This is a small battle. The culture at that time was that although you had people who were going to war, there was always a water boy, a person who used to carry water. And his sole task was that when a soldier has fallen, when a soldier is struck, dying on the battlefield, the water boy has access, free access. He's not killed, he's not challenged. And he goes and gives water to the dying man before he goes and departs from this world. This was the culture of Arabia. They had instituted norms of war. Now, one incident took place, that there was a battle with Rasulullah, and members of the Muslim army were struck down, and they're in their last moments lying on the battlefield, about to depart from this world. As was the norm, this water boy leaves the tent with the mush. He comes running to the first man, and he gives him a little drop of water. Please drink before you pass from this world. The man lying on the battlefield said, no, don't give water to me. One of our mu'mineen, one of our brethren from the army of Rasulullah is lying further afield. Go and give him water. He's also been struck down. Go and give him water before you give me water. And so the water boy runs from the first man to the second man. He arrives at the second man, also struck down on the battlefield. He offers him that water. He says, not to me, don't give the water to me. There's a third person, there's another man who's struck on the battlefield. Give him water before you give to me. And so the water boy runs from the second man to the third man. And he gives the water to the third. The third says, don't give the water to me. Go give it to the first person that you offered water to. And so the water boy runs from the third back towards the first man. What does he find? The first man has already died, departed from this world, thirsty. He runs to the second and finds he has died. Runs to the third and finds he has also died. From communities that used to go to war with each other, that was so morally bereft at the hands of Rasulullah. After only a few years, he turns their morality to such an extent that they're willing to die for each other, die thirsty for each other on the battlefield. How did Rasulullah accomplish this? What was it about this man's personality, the way in which he directed people, the way in which he understood people's realities, that he was able to make such a difference to their lives? Whereby yesterday, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lambasts them in the Quran by saying, إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. And after a few years later, he praises them by saying, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرًا أُمَّةً أُخْرَجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. What was it about this man that was able to accomplish such a phenomenal feat for the sake of humankind? And so, when we see this and we go back into the history of Rasulullah, we find the way in which he dealt with his community. Our scholars tell us that Rasulullah would spend much time on Ghar Hira, correct? He would go up and he would spend days and nights on Ghar Hira, this mountain overlooking the Meccan community. What was he doing there? Was he just performing prayers and devotional tasks? Was he engaging only in tasbihat the whole night? What was he doing when he was on that mountain looking and seeing the people of Mecca? He was pondering upon that. He was trying to understand that community that he was going to be sent to. He needed to understand their strengths and their weaknesses. What made them the way that they were? What had brought them to be a community of their strengths and weaknesses? How can I take their strengths and make them better? How can I expose their weaknesses and make them better? When I speak to them about their weaknesses, how will they react to me? Which of those weaknesses will they wish to retain as a culture? Which of their weaknesses will the aristocrats fight me against? And how will I overcome these particular challenges? This is something that Rasulullah spent many a night trying to do in order to logically understand his own community. And so when he came, he understood each facet, each dynamic of his community well enough to understand their challenges and how he would appeal to them and how they would appeal to him. As we said, the way in which the women of that community were treated. Young daughters were buried alive. Women did not have rights, they were uneducated. The black community had no rights, they were uneducated. The way in which slaves were treated, they did not have rights. Holy Quran speaks about it to the extent where it says, do not prostitute out your slaves. Can you imagine the way in which they used to treat their people within their own communities? The way in which tribes used to go to war with each other incessantly. Rasulullah needed to understand this community and find a way to deal with each dynamic facet of the community. So when he would institute changes, each facet of the community would feel that they could appeal to him and he would appeal to them. He instituted rights for women, and so he appealed to them. When he brought faith, they would not reject him. He instituted rights for slaves. He appealed to them. The slave community would come towards Rasulullah. When he spoke to various tribes who were so used to spending their resources on fighting each other, he brought them together and said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. You are brothers of each other. Nothing differentiates you except your taqwa and your adala. Everybody came together. He appealed to that community. Now think about this very closely. When you read the Holy Quran, you will find there are so many verses that speak about the objections that came to Rasulullah at that time. Ponder upon these objections for a moment with me. What kind of objections came from the community to Rasulullah? As an example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a verse where He says that the community objected to Rasulullah by saying, أَجَعَلَ إِلَهَةً إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا? Do you actually make all of our gods into one God? What a strange thing this is. Look at the objection. Think about this very closely. Rasulullah came, instituted rights for women. Was there any objection from the women of the community against those rights? Rasulullah came, instituted rights for slaves. Was there any objection from the slave community to those rights? Rasulullah said, break racism in your community. Your color, your culture, your descent has no place in Islam. It matters not. Only your taqwa decides who is greater than the other in Islam. Did anyone object to this? Rasulullah managed to bring tribes that were warring for generations together. Did anyone object to this? They didn't. In fact, they even knew about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this so much in the Quran. He says, لَإِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. If you were to ask them, who created the heavens and the earth? لَيَقُولُنَ اللَّهُ. They will say, Allah has created this earth. They didn't deny the way in which Rasulullah brought his religion. He appealed to the whole of society, irrespective of your age, irrespective of your culture, irrespective of your language, irrespective of whom you were. The only group from within Arabia that rejected Rasulullah were the aristocrats, for they felt that they had something to lose. What did they have to lose other than their authority? They felt Rasulullah was going to take away their authority, and so they rejected him. Now, think about this issue very closely. Today, when you speak to Muslims, and especially non-Muslims, when they object to Islam, do they object in the same way? Think about this question very closely. If you go to any website, you know, when you read any newspaper, go online and you read a blog about Islam, or you read, for example, any newspaper and it has a story about Islam. At the bottom, there's always replies, isn't there? People get to type their comments and their views. Take 10 minutes and see the anger, see the hatred towards Islam that is out there. People fear Islam, don't they? What do they think about Islam today in 2014? They think Islam is violent. They think Islam is irrational. They think Islam is superstitious. They think Islam is oppressive. Now, indeed, we may have made Islam to be that today. I'm not denying that. There are ways in which people can see that, and I and you will see that version of Islam. But I'm asking you a very simple question. Look at the way in which Rasulullah brought Islam 1400 years ago. Was there ever any one person that said, "Oh Muhammad, I reject Islam because it's irrational"? Was there anyone that said, "Oh Muhammad, I reject Islam because you're oppressive to women"? Was there ever a person that said, "Oh Muhammad, we reject Islam because you are being racist towards people"? "Oh Muhammad, we reject you because you haven't understood our culture"? There is no such statement like this. They flocked towards this man of every type. Why? Because he was a universal appeal. People could find that although I am me and you are you, I find something in this man that I appeal towards, and he appealed towards me. And so no matter whom I am, what gender, what color, what language, what history I have, I can come towards this man. The problem is, Islam isn't that today. Islam isn't that today. And it's not just those people whom we criticize about the way in which they live Islam. It is also in the way in which you and I have our communities today. Why is there such apathy within our community? Why is it that brothers and sisters, sometimes our youth and our elders, don't want Islam within their household, prefer their culture? Why is it that we are afraid of Islam today? Because it is not doing for us what it did for the community 1400 years ago. 1400 years ago, it appealed to people. It made a tangible difference in their life. It made them a better person. Today, Islam, the way in which we are acting in Islam, is failing to do that very same thing. Because we have not understood the way in which Rasulullah did that. He took a community that was down here morally. إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ, to up here, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرٌ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ, after a period of just a few years. The Islam that we have today isn't appealing to people. The Islam today isn't appealing to Muslims. And this is why people are turning away from it en masse. This is why there is such apathy within our communities. This is why things are moving forward within our communities. How does Islam, the root essentials of Islam, become appealing for us? What did Rasulullah do that was so simple to that community 1400 years ago that we have lost in our elapsation of time until today? As we said, Rasulullah appealed to each demographic of community. If you were the women, if you were the black community, if you were the slaves, if you were Persian, any community felt like they could find something in Rasulullah. And this was something so important. What did he do? He did the very simple task of dealing with the matters at the root of their causes. This is the first thing we want to take away this evening from our series. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, inshallah. He dealt with the root issues within the community. And so, having understood the ultimate reasoning for the issues in the community, if he made the changes at the root causes, then the symptoms would no longer be there. Change, by changing the cause, the effects will change in itself. Think about this in light of the 21st century. Think about this in terms of our own individual selves, our own families, our own communities, and globally as Islam, the way it is today in the 21st century. Think about these issues in the West. I'll just make two, and then we conclude, inshallah. One from London, from where I'm from, one from the States, or a global issue to understand what we mean by the root of our problems. And if we don't get to the root of our problems, we will never be able to truly make a change in society. In London, we do not have, per se, gun crime. There is guns. We're going to talk about guns here in a minute, because it's an issue here in the States. But in the UK, we generally don't have gun crime. What we have, unfortunately, is knife crime. In London, when gangs get together, instead of using guns, they use knives on each other. And so there is a massive problem within inner city children, within certain communities, where knife crime is persistent. And knife crime, unfortunately, has gone like that. The numbers has gone like that. The number of people being admitted into hospital, the number of deaths, killings that take place from knife crime. And so what did our government decide to do? How did they decide to deal with this issue of knife crime and to stop the issue? Unfortunately, they decided only to create bins, and they called these amnesty bins. And so they said, if you are carrying a knife and you want to get rid of the knife, drop it into the bin, and then we will recycle these knives, and then they're off the streets. Now, you can imagine that as a person who feels the need to carry a knife for self-defense in the first place, it is unlikely that he's going to say, oh, okay, well, now you've created a bin for me, I'm going to put the knife in the bin. MashaAllah, it's really changed my life. The reality is that, yes, thousands of knives were put into the bin, but still in the last 3 years there's been a trajectory of growth in terms of knife crime. Moreover, there are other types of brutal crime, isn't there? For example, you don't have to use a knife, you can use a blunt object. You can use a bat, for example. So tomorrow, will they also create bins for bats, and then you can go and put the bats that you're carrying around? It shows that you're not dealing with the root cause of the issue, are you? You're not understanding the way in which a person feels when he's in a gang, when he needs to express himself in that way. You haven't gone into the schools and educated people. You haven't taught how to deal with anger issues. You haven't taught people how to get out of gang life. All you've done is deal with the symptoms and not the causes of the issues. Another example here, gun crime. Across the world, every year, do you know how many people die indirectly or directly from gun crime? 75 million people per annum die because of guns. And now here, traditionally, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, you end up having this debate. And if you are a pro-NRA or you're against NRA, everybody will have their side and they'll say, we should get rid of guns. No one says, no, we need more guns on the street. The reality is it's not dealing with the issue. It's not dealing with the fundamental issue that says when there is poverty, when there is a society that feels estranged from one and another, when there is other forms of crime such as drugs and alcohol and theft, these things will insulate gun crime. And so it is not just about guns, it is about dealing with the fundamental factors of how to get rid of the issue of the gun. It's about education. Even if you try to get rid of guns off the streets, a person will still kill if they feel that they haven't got any other solution. And so you need to deal with the issue at the root of it. I asked you a question yesterday, and I asked you it again today at the beginning of our discussion. If Rasulullah was going to come today to London, to New York, to Cleveland, to Dubai, to Beijing, to anywhere in this world, and to restart his mission for the first time and declare himself, I am Rasulullah, how would he start his mission today in 2014? How do you think he would start it? Yesterday, when he came, he had to look at his community in terms of women, in terms of racism, in terms of lack of education, in terms of tribal warfare. If he came to Iraq, how would he deal with that community? If he came to the United States, how would he deal with that community? If he comes to Britain, how would he deal with that community? If he came to China, how would he deal with that community? We have to understand what Rasulullah was, the way in which the Imams are, the way in which Islam truly is, because it deals with the fundamental of the issues of our time. When we say in our era there is apathy from the youth, we have to tackle it. We can't wait till they go off to university and hope they become interested in Islam. When we talk about our elders and that there is a lack of visitation to them, we have to deal with these issues at the fundamental of our time. When we talk about the modern day sexualization of women and children in our time, we have to deal with it at our time. We have to deal with the fundamentals of our issues. When we talk about drugs and alcohol coming into our communities, we have to deal with the root of the issues, not the symptoms of our issues. We have to deal with these things in the way in which Rasulullah would have dealt with them. Otherwise, we have not understood the prophetic model. And this is what we are talking about. When we come to understand Rasulullah, we need to understand the way in which he lived, the way in which he established his society, the successes of his society, and then replicate them, so that Rasulullah doesn't appear as this 7th century man who doesn't understand, who cannot be having an impact on us, or for the non-Muslim community, the way in which they don't understand Rasulullah. We have to show Rasulullah for what he truly was and what he would be today and how he would impact their society positively in 2015. This, inshallah, is our discussion tonight and what our series will be in the next coming 10 nights. for us to be able to appreciate. For this evening, yesterday we said our homework was to understand reformation, how we were to reform ourselves individually. This evening, inshallah, our reflection is to understand the way in which Rasulullah dealt with his community, how he started. How might he be today? Think about this question tonight, inshallah, when we go home. If Rasulullah was to come today, in 2014, how would he start his mission relative to the society that we live in? Inshallah, we'll be able to pick this up tomorrow as we continue on in our series. Tonight is the first night of the month of Muharram. Yesterday, we spoke about how Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam departed from the city of Medina, how he clambered upon the grave of his mother Fatima al-Zahra, how he clambered upon the grave of his grandfather Rasulullah. We can imagine this man is going from city to city. He's gone to Mecca and he is announcing that he shall depart. This is a community that had heard from Rasulullah, my grandson will die on the 10th of Muharram. My grandson will be left alone on the 10th of Muharram. Even from the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would tell his family members, he would tell his community what were to occur. He was lying on his deathbed. The children and the family gather around Amir al-Mu'mineen and they begin to wish him farewell in his departure from this world. Amir al-Mu'mineen would look at his children and call them one after another. Imagine if he was looking at Sayyida Zainab and Sayyida Kulthum, how he would look at them in their eyes, knowing that after only a few years their arms would be bound and they would be returned back to that same city of Kufa, chained in a way in which they would be slaves, yesterday having been princesses in that same city. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein takes his ambassador, Muslim ibn Aqil, and sends him towards Kufa. As he goes towards Kufa, he starts his mission and he has thousands of people with him. Eventually, he is the one running from street to street, finding some way in which he can hide from the Kufan army. Eventually, he is trapped and eventually he is taken onto the roof of Masjid Kufa. He is beheaded, his body is thrown down towards the floor, his head is taken towards the great gate and stayed there and shown for anyone that if you are to rise against the Caliph Yazid, if you are to rise against anyone from Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad's tribes, this is what we shall do to you. Eventually, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein comes towards the daughter of Muslim ibn Aqil and sits down beside her and embraces her into a tight hug and pats her upon the head. She looks up towards Abu Abdullah and says, "Oh my master Hussein ibn Ali, I have not seen you tap the head of a child like this unless that they have become orphaned. Tell me, what has happened to my father Muslim? What has become of him in Kufa?" Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, in that tight embrace, looks towards her, Hamida bint Muslim, and says, "Oh Hamida, your father has been slain. I am now your father. My sons are now your brothers and my daughters are now your sisters. I will take care of you." We ask you, O Abu Abdullah, if this is the way in which you treated the young orphans, how is it that they treated the orphans after the events of the 10th of Muharram? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his caravan go towards Kufa, and eventually they are stopped by an army of 1,000 people headed by Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. Hur stops him and says, "I have orders that you should come with me and I will take you towards Kufa. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam turns towards him and says, I do not wish to go towards Kufa. If this is the case, then I will turn back towards Mecca or back towards Medina. He says towards his companions, rise, prepare yourself to return back. At this moment, Hur grabs the reins of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's horse. He looks at him and says, "Oh Hur, may your mother weep for you." Hur responds by saying, "Oh Hussein, if you had been the son of anybody else, I could have said this to you. But you are the son of Fatima al-Zahra. How could I say the same thing to you? I wish not to engage you in battle, but accept my orders are to take you towards Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad." At this moment, Imam Hussein says, death is so close to you, O Hur. Be wary of what is about to happen to you. I shall not go towards him. However, if this is the case, we will set up camp here in Karbala. As he comes and enters in towards the plains of Karbala, his horse stops. As his horse stops, he descends from that horse. He arises upon another horse and tries to move. The horse does not move. 3 times he does this, and each time his horse stays. He turns towards his companions and says, what is this area known? One says that this is the area known as Taf. Another one says that this is the area of Furat. A third companion says, this area is known as Karbala. He says, indeed, woe be upon us because of Karb wal Bala. Woe be upon us because of these trials and tribulations that are about to befall us. He now comes and stands there. It is said that his sister, Sayyidah Kulthum, comes running towards him and said, oh my dear brother, my heart is not at peace. My heart is not at ease since we have entered into this plains, into this land. Tell me, oh brother, why do I feel this way? What is it that I'm feeling? Hussein ibn Ali turns towards his sister and says, oh Kulthum, when we were going towards the battle of Siffin, our father Ali ibn Abi Talib stopped en route to this area. As he did, he took rest upon the lap of our brother Hassan. As he did so, he saw in a dream and he woke up and began to cry. We asked him, oh my father, what is it that you have seen in this dream? He says, we saw our son Hussein. He was in this land of Karbala. He was all alone, asking people to come to his aid, asking for people to come to help him, but none came to help him. I saw him in a dream. He was surrounded in a pool of blood, and it was as if rabid dogs were attacking his body, tearing into the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, ripping his body into shreds. This is what our father saw in a dream. And so our father asked me, oh Hussein, when this event occurs, when you are left all alone on the 10th of Muharram, when you are calling out Khal min Nasim and Yansurina and no one is coming to your aid, how will you respond? He says, I will respond with patience, O my father. Do not worry, I will not let you down on the 10th of Muharram. Oh my sister Kulthum, this is what you are feeling. This is the trepidation that you are feeling in your heart, because what is going to happen upon these lands? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. مات الحسين يا حسين. يا حسين 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 يا حسين.